Hi everyone, thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to explain how to properly name binary ionic compounds that contain transition metals. First, remember that naming ionic substances is really simple. You start by naming the cation as whatever element it is, so like sodium. And then you name the anion by taking the name of the element but changing the ending to "ide" to get something like sodium bromide. Also remember that we've got this area of metals in the middle of the periodic table called transition metals that up until now we've been skipping. Well, transition metals form ions too. Those charges just aren't as predictable as these other columns like +1, +2, or +3. They can change. They can be different things. The actual term we use is that the transition metals have variable charges. So to show you what I mean, here's a small snippet of our transition metals from an actual periodic table. Let's take iron as an example. Iron forms a +2 charge sometimes. Other times, iron can also form a +3. That's what we mean by being variable. Manganese does a similar thing. It can be +2, +4, +7, and about 3 to 4 other charges as well. So obviously, when you're dealing with metals in this area, there's an extra level of complication. So let's talk about naming. The good news is that the rules don't really change that much. If your metal is a transition metal like Fe, you still just start by calling it iron, and you still end by changing chlorine to chloride. This still is iron chloride. We just have to add in one extra component to rule 1. If your metal is a transition metal, you need to also include a Roman numeral that indicates its exact charge. And we do that because a transition metal like iron can be different things. Is this iron with a +2, or is it iron with a +3, or maybe even something else? You have to include that information in the name with a Roman numeral. So I've got a little guide that we can use for Roman numerals in case you're not familiar. This goes up to 10. You won't have to go past that. I'm also going to bring back our scale so we can keep track of the charges being balanced within this formula. So the first thing to do when figuring out this Roman numeral is realize that the hard work has already been done for you. You were given the formula. You don't have to figure it out. So you can include that on your scale from the beginning. There's one Fe and 2 chlorides, and there's no need to try adding more to each side. So now let's think about charge. Remember, you can't just look up the charge that the iron has. It's a transition metal. It could technically be anything at this point as far as you're concerned. But the chloride is different. The chloride is in this column. That will always be -1. You can go ahead and fill that in on the scale as soon as you look it up. And if you know that there's 2 chlorides from the formula Cl2, then the total negative charge is -2. Now go back to those ideas from the previous couple videos. The fact that charge always has to be balanced means that if this is a -2, your iron has to be a +2. Now that I know my iron atom has to be a +2, I also know what Roman numeral to include in the name. In case you don't know Roman numeral 2, just look it up and include it in parentheses following the name of the metal. The way you would read this is iron 2 chloride. Before we look at another example, let's just take a minute and recap what you just saw. When you're determining the metal's charge to use in a Roman numeral, the first thing you do is look up the anion's negative charge, and then because the charge always has to cancel out, this is going to give you the metal's positive charge as well. Because the chlorides were -2, that's how I knew that my iron had to be +2. Let's look at this one more time with a different example. Let's try and write the name for COBr3. Remember, it starts the same. Just write the name of each, changing the ending of the nonmetal to "ide," so you get cobalt bromide. A lot of times this is the final version, except cobalt is a transition metal, so I also have to include a Roman numeral. The formula has already been given, so I already know that there's 1 cobalt and 3 bromides. And I can't look up cobalt's charge because it's a transition metal, but bromides I can look up. It's a -1. And because there's 3 of them, they all add up to -3. And because charge cancels out, my cobalt must be a +3. That +3 is the Roman numeral I include in the name, making the final version cobalt 3 bromide. That concludes this video. Thanks a lot for watching. Here's a brief summary.